Sitting in for Munson Steed, I am your host, Tigner Rand, along with my co-host, Kevin Hooks, and our guest tonight is Donna Dillard. How's everyone doing this evening?
Great, glad to be here.
Excellent.
Outstanding. Real estate is the conversation.
Yes.
Real estate is something that many aim and desire to get to, home ownership, or be it investment property, or as well as commercial property. We have a person, a young lady here today who is a owner, broker, realtor, who owns a company called Red Ribbon Realty. How you doing this evening, Donna?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me.
Outstanding. So, question, what made you decide to get into real estate?
Well, when I purchased my first home, I was introduced to a realtor, and she was young, she was Black, and she was a boss. I mean, she was in the top 5% of the entire Metro Atlanta Realtor Association. And as the home buying process went on, and I met some of her colleagues, and these women were all doing extraordinary things. I mean, they were killing it, and they were creating generational wealth for their family and really building their own table. You know, recently, Tyler Perry said, come on down and build your own table. These women started that years ago, and I wanted to have a piece of that pie.
Outstanding. How many years have you been in the real estate game?
Full-time, 3 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going in your third year, and it happens to be at a time when we have reached unprecedented times with COVID.
Yes.
How has this impacted your market, the real estate market?
You know, honestly speaking, COVID did not slow the Atlanta market down at all. As a realtor, our job was actually deemed essential. And so we never had to stop working. Of course, we take precautions when we're going into other people's home, and we're wearing our masks and we're wearing gloves and things like that. But I think the low interest rates, right? So we are at a time where there are historically low interest rates coupled with low inventory. It created for a hot market. So we have not actually seen a decrease or a dip in the Atlanta market at all. It's actually been some record-breaking months. The Georgia Real Estate Board, I believe it was in 1970s when they started keeping record. And if I can remember correctly, it was either June or July had the highest sales since they started keeping record in the 1970s.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes. So we're on fire.
So Donna, Tigner will tell you, you mentioned 1970. I'm a history buff. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, what people don't really appreciate is that, you know, when the Homestead Act happened after slavery, there was 246 million acres of land that were given to white people, and they were given in 160-acre plots. And 46 million white Americans today still benefit from that land. We're talking about generational wealth. We couldn't participate.
Right.
After World War II, we couldn't get home loans, so we had to either pay cash or not get loans or find it on a secondary market. So I'm looking at what's happening today with 1 out of 4 Americans can't pay rent or guaranteed to miss at least one month's rent.
Right.
1 out of 5 are going to miss a mortgage payment. And then I hear you say stuff like, which is the other side of the equation, that the market is hot. And it typically is hot for people who have means. So talk about the challenges of people who are on the up and coming list versus the people who have cash and prepared for times like this, and how they can take advantage of a market that seems so hot.
So that is actually a really great question. So right now, and again, because interest rates are historically low, it's a great time to buy because you have more buying power. You can afford more of a monthly payment. But like you said, what about people, you know, that haven't made that step yet or aren't financially prepared? There are a lot of programs. There are a lot of first-time home buyer programs. There are also programs that do not go on credit score. They're not credit-based. And so you can have a 500 credit score. And there are programs that will work with you until you are actually ready to purchase. an FHA loan, which is a lot of first-time home, that a lot of first-time home buyers use or qualify for. Right now, all you need is a 580. So you don't necessarily have to have a great credit score. Again, because the market is so hot, you do need to have a little bit of savings. So if we go back a year or two where inventory, was at a steady level and sellers were willing to pay closing costs. So as a buyer, you didn't have to bring much money to the table. As long as you can cover your down payment, you can get your seller to cover your closing costs. Well, now that's not the case. So you do need to have a little bit more skin in the game, but there's so many programs out there. There are 100% financing programs, so you don't have to come with a down payment. And some of those programs, after you stay with them for 3 to 5 years, it turns into a grant. And so now you don't even have to pay that back.
Wow. So are you anticipating any return to like the 2008 challenges after the COVID crisis is over? Because a lot of people are going to be evicted. A lot of people haven't been working. 30 to 40 million people looking like they're going to be facing eviction. Are you expecting some kind of a national tragic event like 2008?
Not like 2008. I think the market will adjust itself year over year. The market has been increasing. So if you look back 2 years ago, the average sale price was $275. Now the average sales price in the Atlanta market is $325. So I think there will definitely be some correction. But the problem with 2008 was it was a lending problem. So they were just passing out mortgage to people that did not qualify, that did not have the means. And that created a totally different issue, something that we will not have, at the moment. But yeah, the market will definitely correct itself. We will probably see a little bit of a slowdown, but not much, especially not in our market. And then at that time, investors will be able to, take advantage of that downfall. A lot of people, especially first-time home buyers, saying, well, I'm waiting for a crash and, it'll be better if it crashed. Absolutely not. Not for a blue-collar worker. Because if the market crashes, lending is going to be restricted. Banks are not going to lend money. So unless you actually have liquid, you have cash, even if there's a crash, you won't be able to benefit because the bank is not going to lend you any money. And that's when the investors come in and they scoop up everything.
Speaking of first-time homeowners, what are 5 tips that you typically try to educate those first-time home buyers on what they need to do to prepare themselves to purchase that home?
So the first thing is definitely look at your credit. So many people are scared to pull their credit. They think they know what their credit is. They're like, no, I'm okay. I just want to go shopping first. It doesn't work that way. What budget are we looking in? Right. Are we looking at $100,000 homes, $300,000 homes, $500,000 homes, right? We don't know that. So the first thing you have to do is look at your credit. Don't be scared to look at your credit. Once you look at your credit, if you don't already have a real estate agent or a realtor that you're working with that can refer you to someone that they trust, get with a lender. A lot of people are using Credit Karma and Credit Wise, and they're like, oh yeah, my credit score is 700. No, it's not. Not if you're going by Credit Karma. Right. And they don't want to work with the lender because they're like, well, it's going to hurt my credit score. Well, yeah, it'll cost you a couple points, but in the long run, it's going to benefit you because your Credit Karma score, honey, is definitely not your mortgage score. Right. Another thing.
Can you talk about that really quick since we're on that, the different FICO scores? Because people don't realize that there are different scores for different things you're trying to buy. There's a different score that comes up when you're trying to buy a car that's different than when you're trying to buy a house. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. You have your consumer score, which is usually what you're able to see when you go to these free credit sites. So what is it? Annualcreditreport.com and Credit Karma and things like that. That's your consumer score. Then you can go to a car lot and they pull a different set of credit scores that, and they may approve you for something that you probably shouldn't have. But they don't look at your debt to income ratio when it comes to your mortgage score. So your mortgage score, they're looking at your debt to income ratio. They're looking at any student loans, even if they're deferred, because that's another thing a lot of people say, well, I do have student loans, but they're deferred. The mortgage company doesn't care that they are deferred because they're going to be due one day. And usually people are getting 30-year mortgages. So within that 30 years, that loan is going to be due. So even if it's deferred, that is still, that's still looked at and it's part of your debt to income ratio. So the only person that can really tell you your mortgage score is a lender. So don't be afraid to let them pull your credit score.
Right.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you don't know this, but I'm the chief community officer at a company called Acorns, and we work with people in savings and investing, mostly with the up and coming. And one of the things I really talk to people about is about debt, since we're talking about debt. And they ask me, what's the most important thing to you, Kevin, with regard to financial wellness? And I say debt elimination. Can you talk about the importance of having a very positive debt to income ratio?
Sure. So debt to income ratio is going to determine how much house you can afford. It doesn't matter how much money you make. What is your debt to income ratio? So I know people, or I've had clients that make six figures, but their debt to income ratio is so high, they don't qualify for the amount of home they would, or that they imagine that they would be able to qualify for based on their income. And then also with the type of loans that you get, whether it's an FHA loan or if it's a conventional loan, those type of loans have different debt to income restrictions or requirements. So some loans might say, well, your back end debt can only be 45%, so your debt to income ratio is a huge part of what you can actually afford, no matter how much money you make.
Explain a little bit about that debt to ratio. Break down the numbers a little bit. So what does that typically look like? Out of 100% of your income, what should be the debt to ratio income breakdown?
So let me preface this by saying I am not a lender.
Right.
I do not work in the mortgage industry. But typically your back end of your debt, which is like your car payment, your credit cards, your student loans, things like that, that should not be more than 45% of your income. And that's kind of how they figure it. And then, like I said, it depends on the type of loan. Some programs require you to have a lower debt to income ratio. So again, everything is based on that.
Understand.
I'm a big Dave Ramsey guy. So I believe in zero debt and paying cash for everything, including my homes. And, I think that's something that's aspirational that I'd really like the audience to hear about. Like, for example, if someone walked into your office and wanted to retain you as their agent and help them find their dream home, how much more of an inventory opportunity do you have for them if they say, I'm going to pay $1 million, up to $1 million in cash, rather than having to go through the process of a mortgage and financing and all of that?
Well, I would love for anybody that wants to pay cash to contact me. I welcome all clients, no matter the budget. But yes, you're going to be able to close faster with a mortgage. It takes on average 30 days. Now, because our mortgage industry is so swamped, it's taking 45 to 60 days to close on a home, which would normally take 30 days. But because there is no financing involved, there is no appraisal involved, you can really close a cash loan, less than 2 weeks. Yep. But the thing with that, though, the money has to be sourced. So that's something that I run into not too often, but people will say, especially if it's an investment property, oh, I have cash. Well, the money still has to be in a bank account. Anything over $5,000 has to be wired, and wired only. So you can't walk into an attorney's office with a shoebox of money. Even though you have cash, it has to be in a bank account and it has to be sourced.
You can walk into my office with a shoebox anytime you want to.
I'm glad you prefaced that, because that was going to be my next question. Because you can't walk in with the cash. You got to have it secured in a checking account or a savings account or somewhere in a banking institution.
Yes.
So, let's talk about investment properties.
Okay.
Do you get a lot of people coming in wanting to invest in properties, and what are some of the things that for a person want to get in? What do you typically try to recommend or talk to neophytes in investment property?
Right. So with investments, it's going to depend on what are your short-term and long-term goals. If you are just looking to buy a property where you want to fix and flip and get your profit out within 60 to 90 days, you can really do that anywhere, right? Because you're buying a rehab, you're generally taking out a hard money loan, you're paying it back within, like I said, 60 to 90 days. But if you're talking about long-term investments, I always tell my clients to follow the developments. Wherever the developments are looking to be or planning to be, that's where you want to be. And so generally those areas are low economic areas before the development happens. So a lot of people don't want to purchase in those areas. But if you have the ability to purchase and hold, that's always the best things. For example, College Park. Right now, it's great to get in College Park. They have, I believe is it a 6.5 billion development? It's going to be called Airport City. That the city council have approved. And so they don't have a date to start the development, but that's something that's going to come in the future. So if you have the foresight to buy now and you can hold for 10 years and then sell it, I mean, you can make a couple $100,000.
That's outstanding. What other areas in the metro area do you recommend? I know that over in the what they call the Bluff, which is over on the west side of Southwest Atlanta, is another area that is a lot of development right now.
So right now, just based on numbers, Decatur is a really good place. So 30032 and 30030, their year over year appreciation rate is somewhere around 21%. That's huge. So if you can invest in Decatur, that's a good one. What else? There is a development started on the west side of Atlanta. I believe right now the year over year increase is around 12%. So if you can get in on those areas, that's going to be huge. They say anytime you see a Chipotle, a Starbucks, or a Chick-fil-A coming up, then that's where you want to be.
Right.
And so, but these are long-term investments. You got to put the money in and you got to wait.
Are there any unexpected expenses that first-time home buyers should be aware of? Like that, they get into the home and think, I got the down payment, I got my mortgage payment, but then all of a sudden they're hit with this. Is there anything like that we can inform the listeners and viewers about?
Definitely. Even before they get to the closing table, a lot of first-time home buyers only think about the down payment. Okay, if I'm using an FHA loan, I'm looking at 3.5%. If I'm using a conventional loan, anywhere between 3 to 5% based on if you're using any programs. And so all they have in their mind is the down payment. Before you get to that down payment, you have what's called earnest money. That is usually 1% of the sale price. You put that up with the contract so you show that you are serious about the purchase of the home. Once you go under contract, you need to now get an inspection. You need to make sure that the property that you are purchasing doesn't have any latent defects, or if there is any deferred or delayed maintenance, that you get those addressed. Now you also have your appraisal, right? And so this is something that the bank requires. If they're going to lend you money, they need to know that this property is worth the money that they're lending you. So you're already out of a few $1,000s depending on your purchase price right there before you even get to the closing table. And then you also have your closing costs. Again, like I said before this market, you could negotiate a little bit more with closing costs. Right now, most homes, especially if it's in a good location, it's a good price and it's a good home, they're getting multiple offers. And so a lot of people don't need closing costs. So you need your down payment, you need your closing costs, inspection money, earnest money, appraisal money. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into purchasing a home, and I don't want to scare anybody because it's doable. It's definitely doable, you know, but you definitely need to save as much as you can. If you're thinking about buying a house, cut back on your spending.
Yep, makes all sense.
You are listening, you're watching A Seat at the Table, rolling out A Seat at the Table, and we're with Donna Dillard. I want to thank you for coming on. How can people get in contact with you with Red Ribbon Realty? What are the best ways of communication? Also give your social media handles also.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I definitely appreciate it. If you want to get in contact with me, my email address is donna@redribbons.com. My website is redribbonhomes.com. I'm sorry, my email address is donna@redribbonhomes.com. My website address is redribbonhomes.com. My phone number is 770-712-6345. And my Instagram and Facebook is Donna Dillard Realtor.
Outstanding. We appreciate you for coming on. Thank you for your tips. And we look forward to having more conversation about real estate in the near future.
Again, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. This is A Seat at the Table. I'm your host, sitting in for Mr. Munson Steed, along with Kevin Hooks. We have been talking about real estate and how to invest and get your numbers and monies right to be able to join and buy a purchase. Joining us on the conversation now is Munson Steed. How you doing today, brother?
I'm good. I was listening to all that knowledge she was sharing. I mean, our community needs to understand during this uprising, you need to find a red ribbon style realtor to get behind. You know, you don't need, if you're not in the business of building a house or going out and knocking on doors, you need somebody who can fish for you. And that's fishing for opportunities, being able to walk you through. So you need a professional. And I hear that in Miss Dillard. She wants you to understand what it is. So it's important for us, if we're talking about building wealth, that you definitely focus and develop relationships. And one of my favorite relationships is with a real estate agent, somebody who knows the market, somebody who can look at the market. And that's what Miss Dillard offers to those individuals who haven't, even if you're a second time home buyer, the market changes and you need that subject matter expert. So thanks so much for coming on A Seat at the Table. If we want to create wealth for our community, clearly knowing and having somebody in your mastermind group, it has to be a real estate agent. So we'll see, Ms. Dillard. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. You're so dynamic. Talk to you soon.
Same.
Peace.
What's going on,
Kevin? What's happening, Kevin? How are you?
Wow, man, you know me. I live to give, brother.
Have a good live to give. You know, we need to catch up this weekend. So we got our 6 weeks out on our Peace and Purpose Conference for Women, Wealth Building. That's happening. So we need to go ahead and start the weeklies on the morning show. So we need to figure out, or unless you want to put it on A Seat at the Table so we can literally deal with the wealth gap.
Yeah, let's do both, man. Right now, we've gotten 2 people to sign up.
Ah, good. You're in good shape.
So we got to drive a little bit more traffic. I'm putting us in the budget though for the entire 2021 season. So
I got it. We need to understand what it is clearly.
Come on, 1 program a quarter that we work that drives traffic starting in Q1.
And then we can help them with their ads. They got some pretty non-traditional ads for our community. So I want to help them with that as too. Because our community is very sensitive to ads when it comes to that.
Hey, we got special guests we getting ready to join you talking about a very important subject. You ready for it?
I am. Did you give Kevin in the speech? He knows Faith already, but clearly Dr. Fisher is a phenomenal young man as well who has a true movement in our community. You say, Dr. Fisher?
Peace. Good evening.
Peace.
I feel like I'm in tall cotton. I've made it. I'm gonna tell my wife she gotta upgrade me now.
No, yeah, maybe you must be talking about Kevin or TJ.
Oh, brother.
Talking about having a seat at the table. No, seriously, thank y'all for inviting me in. It's always a joy to be with the incomparable Faith Morris and the folks at the National Civil Rights Museum. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Well, we got a phenomenal evening. I'd like everybody to know that we have Ms. Morris. Ms. Morris, why don't you tell us how we can reimagine ourselves right now as it relates to voting, and why the movement that Reverend Fisher has going on is so important to our community to understand, not just now, but forever we need to be voting.
Well, you know, the National Civil Rights Museum, we deal with issues. We deal with what's happening with disenfranchised communities. We deal with what's happening with Black folks. We deal with anything that's infringing rights. And right now we are in the middle of a voting rights struggle that's been going on for centuries. And we have 19 days, you know, to get this done. So what we have really tried to bring out is for folks to really think about voting. You know, there's been a lot of apathy about voting, and people do come out for national elections. So we expect that there will be a good turnout. We know there have been lots of lines. We know they've had to stay out for a long time. And we encourage folks not to get discouraged because of that. If you think about the history of voting and what we've been through to even have the right to vote, to have voting rights given and then taken away and then given again, and finding that even some of the things that were included in the Constitution, that was included, you know, in all the laws that suggest that Black folks ought to be able to vote, you know, we're finding a few things that are reminiscent of history. So what we encourage folks to don't let any of that. If it's raining, go. If you're hungry, take a sandwich. If you need a seat, bring a chair. You know, it's don't let anything stop us from voting. And I think it's not just for our community, because we do know history tells us that Black folks can make a huge impact on the outcome of any election. And when we sit out, we lose. When we show up, you know, the situation is way better. We do get some of what we're looking for. What's exciting to me is when you have a Pastor Earle, a Dr. Fisher. He has so many titles that he has. We turn his hat around just based on what we need him to sit in and do. He's in my office at the museum. Right. We do rely on him a lot. But one of the things that we have really stuck with him on, because we think it is really, really cool, it's important. And he is a brother that tells it like it is. He ain't gonna make it cute, he ain't gonna make it easy. He does Up the Vote 901. So, you know, with him being that involved, and I also know that stats, information, you know, we try to make sure that you have the kind of information that you need. And we sometimes are information poor. Even though we have so much access to internet, we got access to, you know, all this media that can help us with it. We still need somebody to distill it in a way that makes sense to us and applies to us. And the museum does that. And we partner with folks like Pastor Earle to take it to the streets in a way that we can't. And we push him to do, and that's what I'm so proud of what's happening with him and his organization. So that's what we do at the National Civil Rights Museum. We find folks that get it done, and we push them and let folks know that they exist.
Sounds cool. We're cool with that right now. So why don't we hear, just so that the audience really understands where the movement is. Obviously, this is your specialty, Dr. Fisher. Kind of give us an idea of who we should be, because many of us don't have a new narrative to share with our friends, given all the people chiming in, disinformation, and just where we should be. Where can we be based on what you know, based on an intelligent, fortified spiritually person bringing truth to our community and kind of defining how we should imagine ourselves, because we need to be able to see ourselves differently.
Yeah, I agree. And let me also say, I feel like I owe Faith an honorarium for the way that she pitched what Up the Vote 901 has been doing. In fact, we actually formally launched Up the Vote 901 in front of the National Civil Rights Museum on MLK 50. So from the main stage is when we officially said, hey, this is who we are and what we're doing. And so we, like many other organizations around the country, are committed to giving people a voice through voting, but not just that. So more specifically, Up the Vote 901 is committed to giving more power, information, and representation to more people, and increasing voter turnout in Memphis and Shelby County in every election. So we've seen from the numbers, and not just in 2016, and I'm glad that Faye brought this up. So it's not just about 2016, it's not just about 2020, it is about a political apparatus that has disenfranchised folks, that has created these inequitable systems and structures, and usually is built on the backs of people who are not represented, because oftentimes that apathy is real, because we've seen people on both sides of the aisle end up being in office and still not catering to the needs of the most vulnerable, especially Black folks. And Memphis is a city that's 65% Black. And as much as we can applaud and salute what seems to be record-breaking turnout in this particular election, so we shattered the day one numbers from 2016. Matter of fact, we set a record and beat the number by like 8,000 votes yesterday, and are on pace to beat the number of votes on day two as well. But even if we get 65, 70% of turnout in this election, we had a municipal election last year, 2019, where we elected several city council people. There were judges that were on the ballot. There were a county sheriff that was on, a sheriff that was on the ballot, and we ended up with less than 30% voter turnout. And so part of what we're trying to do is make sure that people recognize first, and I think that this, what I'm about to say now, I think is true across the country. We do not really have a voter registration problem. We have a voter education problem and a voter engagement problem that leads to a voter turnout problem. So even right now, you got people all over the country who are registering people in droves. But if you register 100 people, but they aren't educated on the issues, chances are they're still not going to turn out. Or if they do, they might do something like what a sister did that we were engaging in conversation with in one of our symposiums, who had been voting for the last 40 years, but didn't know that she could leave an office blank if she didn't know anybody who was running for that particular seat. And we got people, again, on both sides of the aisle that play into that narrative. They angle folks who are called super voters, who are people who are always participating in elections, but even if they don't have the information, they feel like they can sway them to vote for them based upon name recognition. And you could talk to just about any elected official or aspiring elected official in the country. One of the first things that they gauge based upon electability is if your name can be recognized. Well, for us, we're not trying to promote personalities. We're trying to focus on policies. We're not really worried about individuals as much as we're worried about issues that are important to people who are impacted by what comes out of the federal office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, or what comes out of governor's mansions all over the country, what comes out of city halls and mayor's offices and county commission chambers all over the country. So for us, we fundamentally believe we can get more people educated and involved and engaged, then that would increase the number of people who turn out, and that would ensure that the people who are elected to office actually share the values that people share in their living rooms and in their kitchen tables.
So, you know, it's interesting. We're talking about all this voter turnout. In 2016, I remember when I found out President Trump won. And for me, it felt like I was immediately drawn back to that by the ninth hour. And when Jesus, you know, yelled out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Like, my God, like I felt that way. Why have you forsaken me? But then to watch what's happened over the next 4 years, the voter participation, voter registration, hopefully a large voter turnout, the record-breaking, Kamala, and all the other people. What I realize is what it really is, it's about the work. And so I appreciate what you're doing, but can you talk about some of the part of the work, the program that you're doing, the work that's attached to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up, you know, this ancient African brother, Jesus of Nazareth, you know, the Black Messiah, as Albert Clegg would call him. Kelly Brown Douglas called him the Black Christ. Matt King Carter called him the Negro from Nazareth. I call him the gangster from Galilee. Actually, in this particular passage we're talking about, he was, and I think this is important for us, and Faith even alluded to this. When he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that's actually quoting Psalms 22, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Old Testament, or he's leaning into his faith tradition. That's a byproduct of his community's cultural experience. And so for us, to Faith's point, right? Like we got to ask these questions. Why were we disenfranchised or not included? Or why have we been now victims of suppression? And, you know, so in North Carolina, the Supreme Court said that the GOP engaged in voter suppression tactics with what they called surgical-like precision. So go back. Matter of fact, I just wrote something for MLK50.com, Justice and Journalism website, talking about how people believe that you shouldn't even vote in presidential elections if you are in red states. Well, the reality is, if you look at a state like Tennessee, it hasn't always been beat red like people think. It was a battleground state. Al Gore came out of Tennessee. Tennessee had a Democratic governor several years ago before you did gerrymandering and redistricting, which is why the census is important, or before you had these voter ID laws that were a byproduct of what Van Jones would call the white lash. So for us, it's been a product of doing some neighborhood engagement conversations with people one-on-one that you just can't get around if you're going to do any type of organizing. It's been a series of voter empowerment symposiums, and we're actually in the cycle of doing that now. We actually got one coming up on Monday. Last month, we did one on crime and public safety, and this month we're doing one on labor and wages, which are part of the Memphis People's Agenda. Here's where I would want to do a news flash. So for everybody in Memphis and Shelby County who spent a whole lot of time saying, we don't know what the people want, we don't know what Black folks want. Well, we actually did a survey of over 2,200 people and asked them to describe how they felt about issues that were important to them. We took the results of the survey that ultimately mirrors the community. I'm talking about 65% Black, 25% white, 5% other. And we didn't have like Fortune 500 companies backing us. I'm talking about, this was just grassroots organizing on social media and otherwise. We took the results of the survey and put it into a agenda-based document. And so we spent the last year having people look at the document, engage the conversation about the issues that are codified in the document, look at the different sections and try to see how we can build upon that. And so these are also like extensions of our voter empowerment symposiums, where we would gather people together, go through the entire ballot and let people know like who was running for office, direct them into very neutral or objective voter guides. So we are, I think it's important for me to say this too. So we are not a bipartisan effort. We are a nonpartisan effort. So we don't pledge allegiance to either of the political parties, because for us, it is about what the individuals on the ground need. And so that's why we spent so much time trying to gauge them and get them to talk about the issues and put it in code, well, put it in agenda form. So beyond that, we are looking well past 2020. We produced the Memphis People's Convention in 2019, which was the first one since the first Black mayor in Memphis was elected in 1991. And so we'll also be doing one in 2021 and 2022. This is where we try to gather people together around the issues, get candidates who are trying to vie and lobby for office to pledge their allegiance to the people and the issues that are important to them. And so we do those things. We do some phone banking things. People could check out our stuff on the website, upthevote901.com, Facebook page, upthevote901, Instagram page, upthevote901, email upthevote901@gmail.com. We engage. Last week we did a faith leaders canvassing training to try to talk to Black faith leaders about how they can engage their parishioners and their congregants to make sure that they have the information that they need, because ultimately this is a voter empowerment initiative. So we're trying to move beyond just the registration into a deeper form of education and engagement.
So Faith, really quick, you've been, with the National Civil Rights Museum, you're aware we've been doing this kind of work for 60, 70, 80, 100 years. And why should we expect it's going to have a different result?
Well, we can't give up. There's no reason. I mean, we can't be silent. We can't be slow. We can't be left behind. We can't be ignorant of what's going on. We're going through too much. And to give up on, not trying to see why things are happening and what we can do to make it better. A lot of times when we talk to folks, they say, well, it's one vote. What difference does it make? Well, it makes a huge difference. And in talking to folks that don't even know what's on the ballot, they have no idea. They know there are two men that's running for president, but they don't know anything else that's on the ballot. It's not the only thing that's on the ballot. And folks get there and they're confused about what they should be voting for. So we have encouraged folks to plan to vote. You know, this is a strategy. You know, voting hasn't been taken seriously enough. And we're at a point now where we can't afford for it not to be one of the most important things that we do, especially over the next few days. And then every time there's an election. The great thing about organizations like Up the Vote 901, that's not just trying to get us to November 3rd, they are forever talking about it, because this voter education is a continuing education course. There is something new about voting every time. There's something that changes every time. So we can't afford to be apathetic about voting. We ought to be pissed when folks act like it's not an important thing. Unless you can look around and you're good with everything, then maybe. And then if it's that good, then we need to keep voting to make sure it stays that good. Mm-hmm. But that's not what we're dealing with right now.
Kevin, can I piggyback on that a little bit, Monson?
Oh, bro, I'm chilling. So y'all go for it. We definitely want to hear from you, Reverend Fisher, because we need a vision.
Yeah. Well, I think Faith is articulating some of that vision too, because I think at the bare bones of it, you can go and look at low engagement communities and you will see a pattern. You'll see a pattern of disinvestment. You'll see a pattern of disengagement. You'll usually see a pattern of low performing schools or schools that are shutting down. You'll see real estate discrepancies and all kind of disproportionate negativity in these same neighborhoods. And then you would have to ask why. And I think it's important to add too, because today is the last day to fill out the US Census because of what the administration just did, because it was supposed to be the 31st. They decided to say, no, it's going to be today, right? But you also see low response rates to the census line up with low turnout rates in voting. And these are places where you generally see the proliferation of poverty and all manner of, neighborhood depravity. And so we should have to ask ourselves why that is the case. And so one of the things that I do when people have conversations about the apathy that Faith has described earlier, and I'm sure you brothers are familiar with, like I asked them, number one, here's the threefold strategy for dealing with people who have apathy. Number one, hear them out, because 90% of the time they have legitimate gripes, because there's a reason that people don't trust the political system, especially if you live in a Black or brown community, because we've seen too much of it. So don't dismiss them. Don't give them the basic, even though it's historically accurate that our ancestor fought and died for that. As true as that is, that's just not persuasive now. As Tupac said, we probably in hell already. We just don't know it. So everybody kiss and tell and go to heaven. Ain't going, right? So that's not persuasive. So number one, hear them out. But number two, explain to them the jelly bean rule, what I call the jelly bean rule. So if voting is not important, if your vote does not matter, well, why did they have our ancestors pick the number of jelly beans in a jar or the number of bubbles in a bar of soap? Like give me the legitimate reason why that would be the case if it was not important. Then I explain to them what is probably the most persuasive of the three-pronged strategy. And that's what I call the 25% rule. So I ask them basic questions. Do you pay taxes? They say, yeah. Or if they try to say, no, I say, you buy clothes, don't you? You buy shoes. You fresh to death. You fresh like the feds watching, as Pharrell would say, right? So you fresh, so you buy clothes, you buy groceries, you buy gas, all of that stuff taxed. Where the money go? Oh, so you mean to tell me you putting money into a system and you are allowing the 25% of people who come out and vote in the local election to decide where the money is going for the other 75%? How do you really feel about that? And usually you'll see a light bulb go off, because people have to understand and recognize, whether we admit it or not, all of us are investing in this system. This is why Memphis and Shelby County is peculiar and important to me. I call it ground zero for democracy, because if you have a city that's 65% Black, but you have a voter turnout that's usually around 25%, and of that 25%, you got upwards of 70% of non-Black people, that means you have people who are not the majority of the people making decisions for the majority of the people. Or as one person would put it, Memphis, even if you have Black people in positions of power, white people are still in control. And so find me another, if you believe in democracy, find me another place in the country where that's inverted. Find me somewhere where it's 85% white, but 50% of the city council is black folks, or 50% of the chamber of commerce, the chamber of commerce is ran by black. You just won't find it. So all of the people who say that they believe in democracy would have to recognize the correlation between low turnout, low engagement in elections, and what this means for people economically, what this means for people in terms of education, what this means for people in terms of opportunity and employment at large. And I'm telling you that Memphis is a wonderful place to be engaged in the type of work that matters, because until we can get more people involved and engaged and educated in this thing, I think we'll still see the cycle go, and we'll be watching people, hit the ball back and forth, and we'll just be spectators and not participators.
Go ahead, Muslim.
No, I was listening, but I'm really concerned and want to get a perspective on the impact, because we have a lot of Black individuals that are definitely participating in some of the sabotage and literally disinformation, wanting to be on a ballot knowing they have no possibility of being elected. So for young brothers and sisters, obviously, who listen to Pharrell, obviously, who are listening to that music, when they see Ice Cube and they hear and see Kanye, what do you say to them? Because that is a real conundrum for people who have defined our culture based on hip hop as the entire Black culture. And these are speakers and influencers.
Faith, I don't want to dominate this, but are you familiar? I know what they're talking about. You familiar with what they're talking
about? But let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's the thing that, and we get asked this question by media all the time. So what y'all gonna do about Kanye? What y'all gonna do about Candace? What y'all gonna do about me? The list is getting a lot longer. What is Ice Cube doing? So what we can't do, and this is what we tell folks, is all that's a part of the mix. That should not take us off our goals of what we need to do. One, we need to understand why they're doing it. And most of it has nothing to do with, Kanye's not trying to be on a ballot for real, not on a day that he is in good shape. He's not trying to be on a ballot for real, but they are all involved in something that is a diversion for us to consider, something that we should not be considering at this point. I mean, we have to stay the course on what's important in our lives. And if any of them can get us there, then maybe, you need to hang with them. But it's not been our experience that that's the way it goes for us, that we need to know who can lead us where we need to go and be a part of that leadership movement ourselves, not be persuaded by things that have nothing to do with what's going to be good for us. Nothing.
Reverend?
Yeah, if I could add, I'll just say, from a historical standpoint, this is not anything new. It might be Ice Cube today or, Kanye West this time. But if you go back in the matter of fact, 4 years ago, and I wrote about this too, Professor Eddie Dillard and others were doing this whole blackout strategy saying, again, if you are in a predominantly red state and you want to vote blue, then do a protest, right? And then Eddie Dillard, in his most recent book about James Baldwin, conceded he was wrong. So, we do have to ask, why would Trump be so accommodating to somebody like Ice Cube, but he won't talk to the Congressional Black Caucus? My wife sent me some. D.L. Hughley was talking about this today on his show, so why do we feel like, and the proof is in the pudding at this point. If you want to know where Trump stands on Black folks, look at the number of Black folks he has appointed to the federal bench, okay? Point blank, period. He had an opportunity to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court if he wanted to, but all these lower courts too. And so I think on the one hand, you got people like Ice Cube, Kanye, and there's others where you talk about Candace Owens or, the sister who Trump got out of prison earlier. I think all of these people, and number one, Black folks are not monolithic. So, it's ridiculous to think that you're going to have 100% participation from Black folks on one side or the other. It's also ridiculous to think that Black folks don't weigh their options. We've done it for the last 100 years, which is why when the Republican Party was more closely aligned with our values, we were voting Republican. And when the Democratic Party started being most aligned with our values, we started voting Democrat. People just need to do the history, right? Like Black folks are real smart and savvy. I know we don't like to say that publicly, but it's true. And when you deal with people like Kanye and Cube, I think that they have egos and desires to not only be included, but to be out front. But everybody doesn't need to be out front for everything. And I would say it's a dangerous thing to take your political cues from somebody like Kanye or Ice Cube. And I'd say it's kind of dangerous to take them from Puffy too. I mean, there are people who have been out here, you know, I'd say the same thing about Killer Mike, even though I think that his analysis is a lot more robust than most of the other entertainers. And I think he just got an award to prove it. But you got people who are doing this work day in and day out for years. Consult them. Have a conversation with some of them. Have a conversation. If you know, one of my partners in ministry is Reverend Billy Michael Honor, New Georgia Project. You know, for the folks in Atlanta, have a conversation with him. Have a conversation with Reverend Derek Rice, the Sankofa United Church of Christ. You know, these folks who are out there in the trenches day in and day out. You know, Cube's plan for Black America. I mean, the movement for Black Lives had an agenda back in 2016. You know, so it's stuff out there. And I think if people are serious, we have to commit to doing the investigative research and getting the information. If we're waiting for some celebrity to just point us in the direction, it allows us to be duped so easily. And that's ultimately how we got the current president in office. Some celebrity pointing us in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I guess the analogy is there, but I'm just not sure that I believe that anymore, Reverend. I think we really are in a moment where we need individuals like you to give even more analysis. I think we've got to talk to the brothers and sisters. If you're sitting there with 3-4 million influencers, likes and followers, we're going to have to be more critical of ourselves. And I'm not sure if you can just wave off the individuals today, because their impact is huge. And most people in the media are lazy. So if they can just put the two of them together, it's just more confusion. You have a less studied community as well. It's like you mentioned 4 or 5 brothers. You can send Faith to this, and we're happy to give them an audience. But we are going to have to hold the celebrities post-election accountable for their behavior. You know, I think it's more that for us as we shape. So what do you see moving forward? Because even when you were saying it, all I was feeling was Breonna Taylor. All I could figure is, you know, if you don't know why to go vote for Sandra Bland. For all, you know, if you don't know why to go vote, there's an agenda that, how do we come up with an agenda post this election that is a Black community culture agenda? Because for me, I'm selling advertising to a client today, and they're big box. They think they know everything. I said to any Black person or any white person that says the word culture and they don't say community that they represent and the beneficiaries, then they ain't talking about no culture that I believe in, and that's not who we are. So I really think we've got to figure out, are you benefiting our culture and our community, or you're not? And I don't care who you are as a celebrity. So how do we really evaluate and keep our community to understand that the Attorney General plays a huge role? Those justices, your homie, don't act like you down with me, homie, and you don't care how many brothers, they're going to bring back 3 strikes. You know, they know it's worked before, and they're thinking about it for your children, and you not voting and literally understanding that they're building, they want to keep private prisons alive. And the only way they can do that is if you don't vote. So how do we keep that narrative, and how do we keep evaluating ourselves? Because I don't want celebrities or anybody else who's sabotaging to not be and put on a list. They literally put us on list when they want to cancel. This is the cancel culture. We have to be much larger and louder about how we do it. So how do you reimagine us post this election coming together as a community to continue your work? because your work is what's really important, and obviously what the museum does to move us forward. Reverend Fisher.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I ain't know if you was pitching that to me or Faith. I would say this. So too many of us have fallen the victim to the shiny object of the elections. And I'm talking about people outside of the celebrities. I'm talking about people in media. I'm talking about people who, you know, are principals and school teachers, you know, people who should be engaged in the work with people who they are in relationship with every day. So yeah, like again, so right now in Memphis, you have, I can name every organization that's talking about we're gonna have massive voter turnout. Well, I was like, yeah, what is the presidential election? We needed massive voter turnout for the municipal election last year. And the only way you're gonna get that, Munson, is if you doing work in January and February and March and April. What we tend to do is the same thing we criticize politicians and aspirational politicians for doing, waiting until campaign season and showing up. But it's people who are doing the work all day, what Outcasts say, all day and day. And we need to connect with them on a regular basis. You know, here's a challenge. Every media outlet like Rolling Out and others, y'all should have a 10-minute segment every show, you know, or once a week, specifically about political engagement, political education. And I'm talking about year round. I'm not just talking about, you know, 2 months before an election starts. Because until everybody sees this as part and parcel of their civic responsibility, then it's just the major media outlets and all of the other people who already have their hand in the cookie jar of the status quo are, I mean, they're well versed in the process. And the process is tell everybody that one person or one election is going to save it. And then all you got to do right now, what do we hear? All you got to do is get 45 out of office. Look, it's people with his mentality who have his policies and his practices and his principles, but they just a whole lot more polished. But they in the governor's mansion in Tennessee, okay? They in the governor's mansion in Texas. They in the governor's mansion in Wisconsin. They in the mayor's office. They in the city council chambers. They in the county commission office, which means no matter what happens with him, you still got to keep your hand on the plow. And I'm saying, if this is something that we're serious about, we have to be serious about it all day, every day, and not just when election season happens. So my vision for it is just a more well-engaged and well-informed community. And it starts, as much as we don't like to talk about it now because it seems like so much is at stake, and it is in this particular election, it starts with those simple conversations, those simple text messages, those simple phone calls, the relationship building work that has to take place even when there's not a shiny object called an election standing before us. So I'll say this, then I'll digress. When I first started Up to Vote 901, Faith, let me tell you, I said every election from 2018, 2019, and 2020. Now, I don't know if that was me just trying to keep my sanity or what, but I'm clear that you just don't change the culture in 3 years. Now, we've done some stuff. Every election, with the exception of the one last year, we have seen massive increase in turnout. But this is a 5 to 10 year project at the very least. And I think people have to be honest about that process and this commitment in the long haul. So that's the vision that I see. I see a more long-term engagement with the electoral process and other forms of civic and political engagement.
So getting out of the whole mindset of an election season, you know, a voting season, and having it as a part of what we think about every day, because something comes up every day that we need to be dealing with. And there's usually some policy that has something to do with it. Part of the conversations that we've had at the museum is folks are frustrated about things, but they don't associate what's happening with them with the legislation that either supports it or makes it worse, right? And connecting those dots is something that we have got to do. So getting ready for a presidential election is frankly the least of what we need to be doing on the voting thing. It's making sure folks understand that they got to vote every time. And when we do see celebrities representing something that we know is not going to be beneficial to our community, you know, we got to call it what it is. But we also got to talk to folks, because what we find is amazing the conversations that you have when folks really let you in on how they're feeling about what's going on out here and what they feel they're empowered to do to change it. And they don't connect always the vote as one of those strategies to do anything that's going to change anything. And so the job is big. It's big. There are more folks excited about voting this time than been in a long time. Got a whole lot of folks that haven't voted yet, first time. And these are not children. These are grown folks that have been voting all along. So there's a huge, huge, huge job that needs to be done.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think the conversation, even Reverend Fisher, for me, comes down to some basic things. Income. Our young people need to be able to connect voting and their income. Their dreams need to be connected with voting, because it doesn't seem apparent that they see it. But I think many people were also shocked that they took to the streets. And so how do they become more organized in keeping, because I think many of them would want to be engaged for the next 10 years, but how can they follow you? How can we get a community that has a collective agenda that we can point to? Because just like you as a man of the cloth can go to the Bible and say, this is what the word says, many of our young people are trying to organize in their minds. You know, it was amazing how when they're in the streets, they're like, but how do we organize? And some had a clue, but where do they continue, and how do we continue that training for our community to organize and keep our agenda top of mind for ourselves? To both of you, we'll start with you, Faith. How do we get that and stay organized and train this next generation?
You know, we've got this voting campaign that's called Imagine in America. And the reason that we even created it is for us to really sit down and think about, if we really thought about what this country could be, you know, we have to imagine it in what we want it to be, and then figure out from that how we get it done. That knowing that if you do something, something can happen is one of the biggest hurdles that we're trying to get over right now, because folks do feel like their efforts aren't going anywhere. And we have to make sure that when you do something, we get something. You know, you mentioned, you know, the protests. Well, you know, we had, you know, over 100 days of protests. Imagine if that protest nationwide turned into something that really changed what happened with our legislators, really changed what this vote looked like. You know, that's the kind of thing. It's giving this nation hope on having the power to make the change. But we got to know what we're trying to change. We got to know the direction that we're going. And that's part of the hurdle that we're trying to get over. Is folks just need to get busy, need to listen and do.
I also think that you know, more structural things can impact that as well. One of the reasons we're in the situation we're in right now is because civics is not being taught the way it used to be taught in the school system. So, you know, people don't know how a bill becomes a law. People don't know the 3 branches of government, right? People might be mad because there's a pothole in their front yard, but they don't know whether to talk to the school board commissioner or the mayor or the city council person or a judge. You talked earlier, Munson, about, you know, district attorneys and things of that nature. Like, you know, people don't understand the power that district attorneys have until Mike Brown gets killed or Breonna Taylor is killed. And then you see the district attorney march up in front of the audience to just try to, you know, smooth over this notion that, no, we're not going to indict this police officer, right? Or people don't know whether police directors are appointed and by whom, you know, or a lot of these things that I think people just don't know. I said earlier, because you talked some Munson about wages and stuff like that. So the labor and wages symposium that we're doing this week is specifically targeted and purpose to try to get people to understand. Like, for instance, in the state of Tennessee, there is no minimum wage because we are at will state. So, you know, a right to work state. And so that means it falls back on the federal minimum wage, was $7.25, which ain't changed in the last 20 plus years, right? But a lot of people don't know that. And so, you know, the Labor and Wages Symposium is intended to try to help people connect the dots between, you know, how much money people make and why Memphis may be, you know, the poverty capital of the country, regretfully, just like the criminal justice, you know, the one we did on crime and public safety last month was about criminal justice reform and who would be the person in office who has the potential to change some of these things. How did they get in office? What is their agenda? What kind of promises did they make on the campaign trail? Who are they beholding to? But above all of that, Munson, we have to create a process by which the people who end up in office are the people who are beholding to those people in those communities and not beholding to these major corporations that don't really care much about anything other than profit. So again, I think it's important for us to admit and acknowledge something that our ancestors knew. This is a long train that we got to ride for a long time. And there's going to be some bumps in the road. There's going to be some highs and lows. Sometimes you take two steps forward and 3 steps back. But at the end of the day, we have to run our leg of the race and make sure that, you know, when we pass the baton to the people in the next generation, you know, that they are empowered to do the protesting and the organizing. And then lastly, there's schools that do this stuff. The Highlander Center in Tennessee, you know, they teach civil disobedience and protesting strategy and organizing strategy. You know, there are people who are doing this work, man, all over the country. And I think that, again, people need to connect with them, support their work, fund their work. And I think we'll see a change if that happens.
I'm not sure about that. You know, I think that maybe if you bring that to our community, maybe we'll trust it, because we have a lot of trust issues. So, I mean, I think that's important, because I didn't know about it till you said it. And I think that we've got to figure out how many of these groups, particularly if they're a white group, I don't know if this is a white group or not, but whatever groups that are going to organize our community, we have to trust. Sure. And I think that's what I like about what you're talking about. But where are the KPIs? Where are the key performance indicators for us as a community post the election to kind of figure out what we need as an agenda? So I think that for me, how do we get them there? How do we keep the training, whether it's at the museum? Obviously, it's with what you're doing. So if it's a live broadcast with us, then we want to know, you know, can you stream to us so that we can stream it out? Or how do we connect so that the community can better see? Most people don't have any idea what the minimum wage is until you're living off of it. Then all of a sudden it's something new. Most people haven't been to Memphis. You know, the average person really doesn't move around like you might move around, I might move around. And so they're not necessarily as concerned with the working poor. So I think those are the things that we see. Dr. King was with that whole poor man campaign. What is it that our community, if you had to name the top 3 on the agenda that voting really result beyond electing politicians that impacts them? What are our top 3 so that we really can kind of say, okay, this is the agenda post, not just the president, but these are the 3 that we really want y'all to focus on so we can move forward.
So I think it's simple, and people have been talking about it for the last 100 years. You go back to the Pullman porters and all of that if you want to, or go back to Dillard. You're talking about employment, which is economics, right? You're talking about education, right? And you're talking about criminal justice reform. I mean, these are the 3 things that 9 times out of 10, when you slice it down, even when you're electing somebody to office, you're electing somebody to office to either change or manage a situation related to economics, education, and criminal justice reform. And so, you know, it's important for us to be educated on those things. Look, I share some of your skepticism, Munson, and I'm sure Faith can attest to this. You know, I share some of your skepticism. I may even be what some might call a pessimistic prophet, if that's the case, because we've seen so much of it. But there's also, you got to admit this, man, there's a certain brilliance and transcendence that Black folks tap into, you know, that create some fantastic and phenomenal realities, man. I mean, I said something about A. Philip Randolph and the Pullman Porters. You know, there's A. Philip Randolph Institute around the country, and there's a chapter in Memphis. I mean, you got the movement for Black Lives. Who would have saw that in 2010 or 2000, right? I mean, the list could go on and on and on about some of the wonderful things. You said something about Dr. King, the Poor People's Campaign. Salute to Bishop William Barber, who has revived that. You see that's going on right now. Man, it is so much fantastic stuff. You know, it's kind of hard to be a fatalist because Black folks just been too brilliant and too bold and too dynamic, you know, but it doesn't mean that it's going to fly in on the wings of inevitability, as King used to say. It means that it takes people like me, you, Faith, and others to not just do the work, but as you said, Munson, amplify it. So again, salute to, you know, Rolling Out for trying to get the message out. And I just think we need, you know, you, Roland Martin, and so many other folks trying to do, you know, the type of broadcasting and media stuff that needs to be amplified more. And the same way y'all's platform need to be amplified, you know, it's people who are doing work at the grassroots level and it needs to be amplified as well. The same way y'all need to be funded. You know, I'm praying right now that God sends, you know, $500 million to y'all. Then y'all just send a tithe to my
That's it. That's
right.
That's it.
You know.
Funny you should say that. Vice, Disney wrote off $500 million off of Vice.
Mm-hmm.
Just wrote off $500 million. Just wrote it off. So it's a gift. Faith, your three for reimagining. What should we be imagining? What three things would you like to think that we would imagine when we think about voting in its role?
You know, it's really hard to get past the three that Pastor Earle said, because there are so many levels to the three: the economic justice, the criminal justice reform, education. You know, Black folks are doing better in so many areas, but not good enough to excel in all those areas. You know, we are more educated than we've ever been. We can't find a job. So how does that work? How can you work full time and live in your car? You know, going to a job every day. There's so many simple things that are happening out there that shouldn't be happening. So we talk about the top three. The list is probably the top 10. And the list hasn't changed in years. This is not a new list. This is the same list that Dr. King, he had 6: housing, education, you know, militarism, all of that. We're still dealing with the same things that Dr. King was talking about before he died. And the shame in it is that as much as we talk about it, we still haven't made enough dent in it to stop talking about it in the way we have. We haven't made enough strides in it. We can't stop making folks aware that those issues are the same issues. You walk through the museum right now and, you know, we talk about the historic movement. Well, it ain't so historic. You walk through there and everything we talk about, there's a contemporary partner to it right now. Look out the window, it's the same thing. So until we turn all that over, and when is that gonna happen? I mean, we've been working through it for centuries. The best part of what's happening right now, and this is what's encouraging, is that the voices are a whole lot louder. The voices are even with folks that are trying to pull our attention away from the things that we need to be focused on. We still are pulling together. We still know that there's so much work that we need to be done. We don't have time. We don't have time to be pulled away from what's important. And since George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the folks, you know, we've got so many, but especially, you know, within these last few months, where this nation has kind of turned around and said, okay, well, maybe we need to really be rethinking what this is. And maybe we need to put some money behind it. And maybe Black Lives Matter really, you know, do matter. Earle has this, and you were one of the first ones, I say it all the time now, Earle, but you were one of the first ones that said, all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. And that is absolutely true. I mean, how can you not think that? So yeah, those top three are still the top three. You expand the list to top 10 and it digs a little deeper. But I do see that potentially, because we talk about it in a lot harder terms, we're not as nice about it anymore. We really are getting the point across. Feels like there's more listening and doing around it than I have felt, you know, in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Got a lot to go.
Dr. Fisher, just kind of in closing, what would, if you were standing out in front of a group of young people, and particularly millennials right now, or people who are voting for the first time, what would you tell them they should do after they vote?
I say strap on your seatbelt, because that's when the real work starts. One of my partners in ministry, John Faison, said the other day that voting is not the ceiling of civic engagement, it's actually the floor. And so, you know, I would say to them, keep your eyes open, stay woke, make sure that you are engaged in holding people accountable and responsible, and doing your part to make sure that the type of community and the type of culture and the type of world you want to see comes into fruition. Because all of us are, as my mother would say, living our history today. So it's going to be somebody else's history to read about next time, but we live in our history today. So I would tell them, strap on their seatbelt, stay woke, cry loud, spare not, as the scriptures say, or you know, stand up, speak up, and keep showing up.
Faith, same question.
Well, it's a never give up option for us. The work's not done. And even when we get through this list, I'm sure there'll be a new list, an expansion of that list, a different level of that list. There is no chance that we have that we'll give up and stop doing the work that we need to do. We don't have that option. We've got too many people that we've got to bring along. We've got too many people that really have not realized any of you know, what this country has to offer. And we've got to pull them up. We've got to be a leader in that. Young people, I am so impressed and encouraged by the attitude of young people right now. They have said, you know what, y'all need to sit down. Y'all need to sit down and we're gonna do this for you. Watch and see how we do this, because we are not gonna be polite. We're gonna tell it like it is. We are impatient and we're tired of waiting. So our procedure, you know, our process is to go to the streets and get it done. And that's what we've been seeing. You know, what I'm encouraged about is to see what's the result of that. But I feel good about what young people are saying right now. They're tired of waiting. They're tired.
Cool. Well, thank you both for coming on a seat at the table. You know, great to meet you, Dr. Fisher. Obviously,
Likewise.
Thanks, Faith, for all the support that you give. My thing is vote, and definitely vote with your dollar. I think one of the biggest things I would like to see us continue is to think about how we vote with our dollar. I'm more concerned with that. I think it's a bigger impact. Not only it doesn't keep you from voting in an election, but if you begin to think about how we vote with our dollar post-election, I think that will begin. You know, don't be on Facebook if they're not going to hire people. Really begin to say, don't vote with your time, because what you give your time to is what you're giving your money to. So really appreciate you coming on a seat at the table. Thanks to Faith Morris. Thanks to Reverend Fisher for coming on a seat with the table. I am Munson Steed. You do not have to be in the streets, but you do have to be in the struggle. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow night on a seat at the table. Peace.
Peace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.